Well, Davina, police are doing everything they can to close in on this killer. Investigators are now trawling through fresh CCTV.
Doncaster is a leafy suburb in Melbourne, Australia, known for its expansive shopping centre and sweeping views of the city skyline. Once dominated by orchards, the area has transformed into a bustling suburban hub with a mix of modern and older homes, popular with families for its schools and parks. One of its most serene spots is Coonong Creek Linear Park, a long green corridor following the meandering creek. The park is a haven for walkers, cyclists and nature enthusiasts, with its tranquil trails, abundant birdlife and paths offering an escape from the city's pace. However, one evening in March of 2015, just before the sun dipped below the horizon, the peacefulness of the park was shattered. A woman who lived nearby was startled by the sound of loud, panicked screams. Masa Vukotic was born into a close-knit Serbian family with roots in Montenegro. The family had left the war-torn corner of the world to build a safe and peaceful life. They moved over to the quiet suburb of Doncaster in Melbourne, Australia, where Masa lived with her parents, Slavoljub and Natasha, and siblings Peter and Nadja. Her family cherished their heritage and often travelled overseas together. Masa had visited most countries in Europe and could speak 3 languages. At Canterbury Girls' Secondary School, 17-year-old Masa was working towards her VCE, surrounded by a tight circle of friends. Her tutor, Glenn Nicholson, fondly said of her, "She had a good heart, integrity. She thought about the big picture and she was always smiling." Her friends knew her as a loving, sweet and intelligent girl with a zest for life. One of these friends, Sarah, recalled, "She was intoxicatingly witty, bitingly smart and exquisitely dressed." Masa's passions were many. She adored the colour pink and was deeply into cosplay, especially drawn to the Lolita fashion style that emphasised her playful and artistic spirit. She dressed in elaborate Japanese-inspired outfits, often accessorising with her signature pink tones, embodying the persona she cultivated online. Known to her Tumblr followers as Princess Marcy or Sparkleheim, Masa embraced this whimsical side of herself with pride. She had aspirations to become a lawyer and was a staunch feminist. When she wasn't lost in her books or planning her next cosplay, she loved spending time with her beloved pet rabbit, Roger. On the 17th of March 2015, Masa Vukotic went to school where she attended classes and caught up with her friends. After the final bell rang that afternoon, she returned home, determined to focus on her studies. As she settled in, Masa took a break to scroll through social media, exchanging messages with her close-knit group of friends. Before diving back into her books, she tended to her pet rabbit Roger, ensuring his food and water were fresh. The house was quiet that afternoon, with the faint hum of appliances in the background. Nadja, her younger sister, was at soccer practice with their father, Slavoljub, and her mother, Natasha, was still at work at a pharmaceutical company. Her brother Peter would be home shortly from school. Once everyone gathered back home that evening, the usual dinner time routine unfolded. As the clock neared 6:40 p.m, Masa excused herself from the table. She slipped on a pair of comfortable shoes, placed her headphones in her ears and tucked her iPhone safely into her pocket. She stepped out of the door for her usual after-dinner walk, a routine that she enjoyed most days. The day was still bright, with roughly 90 minutes of daylight left. Masa headed towards the Coonong Creek Linear Park footbridge, a familiar pathway that ran alongside the Eastern Freeway, just 500 metres from the family's home. But shortly after she left, a resident living near the park was startled by a scream that pierced the air. It wasn't the playful shout of children or the sound of somebody calling for attention. It was a blood-curdling scream, filled with raw terror. It was unlike anything the resident had ever heard before. Alarmed, she immediately picked up the phone and called police, fearing that something horrific had happened. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene, sirens echoing through the quiet streets as they raced towards the park. Guided by the eerie stillness that followed the earlier screams, they quickly honed in on the source. Lying motionless among broken branches and scattered leaves, below a forked gum tree, they found Masa. Her pale figure blended with the earthy tones around her, but the side of her body, drenched in blood, was unmistakable. Gently, the responders pulled her from the scrub and placed her on the path. But the grim reality of the situation set in almost immediately. There was nothing they could do. There were 49 stab wounds slashed across her head, neck, chest and abdomen. The fatal blows had been to her neck, causing her to bleed to death. News of the tragic discovery in the park spread fast. As officers secured the crime scene, it wasn't long before Masa's family learned that something was terribly wrong. Her mother, Natasha, arrived at the park after Masa failed to return home from her evening walk. The area was now swarming with police officers, but Masa was nowhere to be found and her phone calls went unanswered. Natasha explained to the officers that her daughter had been out for a walk in the area and she feared that something bad had happened. A senior officer approached, asking Natasha for a description of her daughter. Her words froze him. The description matched the lifeless body they had found only moments earlier. Masa's phone, lying beside her in the dirt, had been ringing incessantly since they arrived. The sergeant asked Natasha to call her daughter once more. As she dialed, the ring of Masa's phone echoed from the footpath, confirming her worst nightmare. The details of Masa's murder spread quickly through the area, and it left people both horrified and terrified. Detective Inspector Michael Hughes commented, "This is part of her routine. She's been walking daily. It's terrible a 17-year-old can't go for a walk on a trail in a park." The park was a popular one for people to go walking and jogging, and it had always been safe, even for those who were alone. The fact that it was so out in the open, running alongside a busy road, made people feel safe. It was always busy, and it wasn't the kind of place one would expect a murder to occur during broad daylight. One local, Greta Enziger, said, "Just when you feel safe, when you feel that Doncaster is a good suburb to be in, it's really disturbing." Another local, Adriana Vlamis, commented, "I'm pretty scared to be home by myself. It could have been me." The police asked people to remain vigilant because they weren't yet sure of the details surrounding her murder. One possibility was that Masa was followed by somebody, while another was that it was completely random. The next day, scores of people gathered at the crime scene. Most of them were dressed in pink, which was Masa's favourite colour, and they lay down flowers. The investigation into Masa Vukotic murder began to take shape as detectives followed the first crucial leads. Witnesses from the park reported seeing a man running from the area, clutching a plastic bag. With this information in hand, detectives combed through CCTV footage, hoping to identify the suspect. Before long, they spotted a man matching the witnesses' descriptions. A slim figure in his 20s, with short dark hair, dressed in dark clothing. He was seen running from the reserve shortly after the terrifying screams echoed through the park. In his hand, there was a white plastic shopping bag, exactly what had been described by onlookers. Surveillance footage captured the man as he hurried past a local school before boarding a bus on Doncaster Road just after 7 p.m. He disembarked near the intersection of Hoddle and Johnson Streets in Abbotsford, further eluding police. Although his face was obscured in the footage, detectives believed his distinctive run and overall appearance would be recognisable to those who knew him. With this in mind, investigators publicly announced their belief that the killer was likely a local man. Detective Inspector Hughes stated, "This smacks of someone who knew the area. You wouldn't pick it at random."
Well, Davina, police are doing everything they can to close in on this killer. Investigators are now trawling through fresh CCTV in a bid to identify the man in question. Late last night, they released that clear image of the man that they want to speak to. They believe he could be responsible for the killing. He was captured about 20 minutes after the killing of 17-year-old Masa Vukotic. He was getting onto a bus. It happened here in a park around 6:50 on Tuesday night. Now, Masa had been going for her evening stroll. She had her headphones in. She was listening to music when it appears that she's been set upon in an apparent random killing. Now, neighbours reported hearing a shrill scream before seeing a man in a red shirt running from the scene, carrying a white bag. Now, that description fits the image of the man police saw getting on the bus about 20 minutes after the killing.
On the morning of March 19th, Melbourne was unusually quiet. Yet beneath the calm surface, detectives were still hard at work investigating Masa's murder. The community was shaken, but the sense of unease would only deepen as a string of violent incidents unfolded throughout the city that morning. It began when a 26-year-old man stepped into a lift on his way to a pedestrian overpass. Just before the doors closed, another man entered. The younger man instantly recognised the stranger. He bore a striking resemblance to the suspect seen on the CCTV footage following Masa's murder. As the lift descended, tension filled the air. Then, in an instant, the suspect made his move. He grabbed the man in a headlock and began savagely punching him in the face. Demanding the man's wallet, the attacker grew frustrated when he realised the man didn't have one. In a frantic rush, he grabbed the victim's phone and fled from the scene on foot. Just a short distance away, the same man attempted another crime. In McCracken Street, a 77-year-old man sat in his BMW, unaware of the looming danger. The suspect approached the car, intending to steal it. Fortunately, the man managed to drive off quickly, escaping unharmed. But the suspect's rampage wasn't over. Just around the corner, he targeted his next victim. Inside the Word bookstore on Harvester Road, a woman stood behind the till. The man entered the store, seemingly calm, and struck up a conversation with her. But without warning, he lunged at her, choking her and then raping her as she desperately struggled with him. Her screams for help echoed throughout the Christian bookstore. As she cried for help, the suspect mocked her, asking, "Where's your Jesus now?" Hearing the commotion, two passersby rushed inside, startling the suspect and forcing him to flee. As news of the crime wave swept through the city, details began to emerge, painting a vivid picture of the attacker. Victims and witnesses described a man who matched the appearance of the suspect from the CCTV footage after Masa's murder. The resemblance was undeniable, and detectives grew increasingly certain that the man responsible for the recent string of attacks was Masa's killer. They also knew they needed to act quickly before more lives were put at risk. While detectives combed through leads and searched for the elusive suspect, a development occurred that would change the course of the investigation. A man calmly walked into the Sunshine Police Department and handed himself over to the authorities. Almost simultaneously, a phone came in to the police station. The caller claimed they could identify the man seen in the CCTV footage from the night of Masa's murder. It was a 31-year-old man named Sean Christian Price, the caller said. It was the very same man who now stood before detectives in the police station. And they knew exactly who he was. Price was already well known to both police and mental health services due to his troubled history. Born in 1984, Price experienced a tumultuous upbringing. After his parents' separation, he became a victim of both physical and sexual abuse, which deeply impacted his development. He told anybody who would listen that his father had mistreated him and would even repeat his childhood experience by smashing himself in the face with a closed fist or putting cigarettes out on his own flesh. At just 12 years old, Price had his first encounter with mental health services when school staff grew increasingly concerned about his well-being. His behaviour worsened as he approached his teenage years. By the beginning of year 11, he had dropped out of school. Around this time, Price began using marijuana and amphetamines, further derailing his already unstable life. Price's home life was still equally as chaotic. He drifted between living with his mother in New South Wales and his father in Melbourne, often without a stable place to call home, resorting to couchsurfing with friends and acquaintances. His situation only deteriorated between February of 2002 and June of 2003, during which he committed a series of violent offences, including rape and attempted rape. He turned himself into police after attacking 6 women and a 13-year-old girl during the daylight hours. He had followed a pair of 13-year-old girls before picking one of them up and pushing her down onto the footpath and assaulting her before a bystander intervened. During his crime spree, he sexually assaulted a mother of 2 after following her home. He forced her way into the door, punched her, and threatened to kill her children. In most of the assaults, he would ask his victims for directions and then follow them home, where he attacked them. He also admitted to committing similar crimes in New South Wales, but he was never charged with them. In October 2004, a judge in the county court sentenced Price to a hospital security order for a total term of 8 years and 2 months, with 5 years and 5 months to be served. While serving his sentence, Price was admitted to Thomas Embling Hospital, a secure psychiatric facility, on 4 different occasions due to his deteriorating mental health. Some doctors thought he was schizophrenic or suffering from psychosis. Others thought he was a psychopath or narcissistic. Then more thought that he had borderline personality disorder. He was prescribed antipsychotic medication which dulled his impulses, but only slightly. An unnamed source commented, "His mind was just always going on either thoughts of self-loathing or angry thoughts about what was done to him. It was just this constant battle in his head about everything." While Price was at Thomas Embling Hospital, Prime Minister Tony Abbott visited, and Price punched him twice in the face without warning. One staff member said of him, "He was like a wrecking ball in there." He would throw into violent outbursts and punch walls until his fists were bleeding. It was never clear what might set Price off, so the best tactic was not to engage with him and to avoid all eye contact. One other inmate recalled how they were playing football in the garden 1 minute, and the next, Price was kicking his head in. Another inmate compared him to Gary David, the violent self-mutilator, who was only kept behind bars by one-man laws designed by the state government to keep him away from the public. On another occasion, Price was involved in a rooftop standoff. He only came down after his father arrived and spoke with him. During his time at the hospital, he told people that raping women was a natural high. Despite his evident problems and lingering violence, Price was granted parole in November of 2010. His freedom was cut short when he attacked a female forensic psychologist at forensic care just 7 months later. His parole was revoked and he was sentenced to 4 months in prison. Despite his repeated offences, Price was released again, and 5 months later he was placed under a supervision order under the Serious Sex Offenders Act of 2009. One condition of this order was that Price reside at Corella Place, a faculty designed for high-risk sex offenders. It was known locally as Village of the Damned, a place where sex offenders were kept for the safety of others. However, Price's violent behaviour did not cease. In December of 2012, he was involved in a series of offences at Parole Place, including criminal damage and assault. He had caused more than $40,000 in damage to an administrative building and cars. He used rocks and a pole and wheelbarrow as battering rams after he was told he couldn't use the gym. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. During his stint in prison, he found himself in the isolation unit, where he threatened to kill police and children if he wasn't let out over the prison intercom.
I'll give respect. We'll bitch in the car. Dog, turn the radio off, mate.
He said in a police interview.
I was saying some pretty vulgar and disgusting stuff in relation to using knives on people's orifices and threatening to hurt children. I was trying for attention. I was buzzing up continually every 2 seconds saying, call the police, tell them about to kill children, call the police, tell them I'm going to, I don't know, I can't remember. None of it was actually much thought out of.
He said that he was acting out just to try and get attention because he was starved of food and water. Price subsequently wrote a letter to The Age in which he said that the treatment of prisoners in Victoria was promoting the popularity of Islam. Just 12 days after this outburst, Price was released back into the community. His supervision order still had 8 years to run, but his sentence was reduced on appeal. The judge had found that his mental health problems contributed to his offending. Instead of returning to Parole Place, Corrections Victoria housed him in an apartment block in Albion. As part of his release, he remained subject to a supervision order, and he was required to report regularly to Corrections Victoria. But it was a very relaxed supervision order, especially given the violent nature of his crimes. He was a ticking time bomb, just waiting to explode. After Sean Price walked into the police station and surrendered himself, officers quickly noticed his striking resemblance to the man seen on CCTV. He was immediately taken into their interrogation room, where detectives began their questioning. Without hesitation, Price acknowledged that there was a good chance that he was responsible for the murder of Masa. His tone was chillingly casual, as if he were discussing an everyday occurrence rather than a horrific crime. Price then proceeded to make a full and detailed confession. He revealed that for quite some time he had been preoccupied with thoughts of killing someone. He said that he hated society and had been getting the urge to murder for quite a while now. He stated, hating, I'm going to hurt the fucking dogs. He said he had chosen a wealthy suburb, believing it would drive home the message that he wanted to send. That evening, Price entered the park with a butcher knife concealed in a plastic bag. He lingered there, scanning the people passing by until he spotted Masa approaching. Her innocent and carefree demeanour seemed to provoke him. To the detectives, he described Masa as looking like a yuppie, a term he used with disdain. What stood out in his mind was how she interacted with her surroundings. He told them, she started talking to a bird like fucking Snow White. This one just ended up being the one. I just had to kill her. Price recounted how he grabbed Masa and dragged her down the path and away from sight. Despite her desperate pleas for him not to hurt her, he ignored them and stabbed her repeatedly, 49 times in total. He said he stabbed her so many times to make sure that she was dead, before adding, otherwise, it was a fucking waste of time. But the confession didn't end there. Price went on to tell detectives about his plans for the following day. He had travelled to Seaholme with the intention to kill again. Armed with the same knife, he wandered through the area, seeking another victim. He bluntly said, I was just going to keep doing it, stabbing. I thought, beautiful, another one of their fucking princesses or good person fucking suffers. Despite his twisted desires, the second murder never materialised. He explained that his intended victim had given him $50, and this small, random act of kindness derailed his intentions. But even then, he still had a thirst for violence and destruction. Price said that after seeing the news on Masa's murder, he decided he wanted to sexually assault somebody. He stated, "I thought, you know what, man, I'm going to jail forever. I need to bust a nut. I'm never getting out. I'm just going to take some chick and seize her." He told the detectives that he had raped the woman in the bookstore because he knew he would eventually be caught for Masa's murder. The community let out a collective sigh of relief after Price was arrested. The media flooded the neighbourhood where he lived in a small flat in Albion that was owned by Yarra Community Housing. It was on the opposite side of the city to where Masa was killed. Several of his neighbours spoke with the reporters that had gathered, and they all described him as a strange and frightening individual. They said that he was a loner who refused to look people in their eyes. One neighbour even said that when she saw the CCTV footage of the suspect, she thought that it may have been Price. However, she thought that it couldn't have been him since it happened almost 40 kilometres away. Detectives continued looking into Price, focusing on his movements before and after the murder of Masa. They discovered that before handing himself in to police, he had spent a lot of time at Brimbank Library. But the only thing he did while there was read the press coverage of the murder. The month before the murder, he had been a familiar face at the library as well. He had spent time researching serial killers as well as policing, crime scene investigation and forensic investigation. But that wasn't all. He also posted 3 bizarre YouTube videos, including one of a rap where he complained about people digitally raping his ears. On March 19th, Sean Price faced his initial court hearing. As the judge read aloud his date of birth, Price, who evidently misheard, believed the judge had said a much earlier year. He let out a laugh and quipped sarcastically, "Are you a judge? I must look pretty good for my age." His casual mocking attitude during the proceedings stood in a stark contrast to the gruesome crimes he was now charged with. Alongside the murder charge, Price was also charged for a series of violent acts committed during the aftermath of his rampage: rape, 3 assaults and 2 robberies. As he left the courtroom, he flipped off the photographers. Just a week later, on the 26th of March, hundreds gathered at Springvale Botanical Cemetery's Boyd Chapel for Masa's funeral. Her brother Peter and sister Nadja led the procession, carrying her white coffin to the front of the chapel where it was placed down. Around 1,000 mourners attended the service, and it took over an hour for the crowd to pass by and pay their respects, many of them kissing Masa's coffin. In an emotional tribute, Nadja tearfully reflected on her older sister, stating, "Masa was beautiful on the inside and she was also beautiful on the outside." She said that she was honoured to be her little sister. Their father, Slavoljub, who struggled with his grief, spoke of his efforts to be as brave and courageous as Masa had been, even though her loss was nearly impossible to bear. He addressed his daughter directly, saying, "It's hard, it hurts, it's unbearable, but we will try to be brave and courageous as you were. I promise I will come to you one day. Until then, my heart will bleed." Natasha, Masa's mother, clutched her husband's hands as she spoke about her unwavering love for her daughter. In a voice full of heartache, she said, "I believe someday, somewhere, you'll wait for me with open arms and you'll say, 'Come here, Mum,' just like you always have." Following the deeply moving service, Masa's classmates formed a guard of honour, as her body was carried from the chapel, accompanying her to her final resting place. In June, Sean Price appeared before the Melbourne Magistrates Court via video link, where it was announced that he would undergo an assessment by a forensic psychologist. The purpose of the evaluation was to determine whether Price was mentally competent to enter a plea. On the 17th of August, Price returned to court, where he unexpectedly pleaded guilty to the murder of Masa. In addition to the murder charge, he also pleaded guilty to one count of robbery, while the other robbery and assault charges were withdrawn. However, he pleaded not guilty to the rape charge. This was despite the fact that prosecutor Michelle Williams previously stated that Price was expected to plead guilty on the rape charge. It was also despite the fact that he had confessed to it immediately after he was arrested. Defending his decision in court, Price claimed, "I don't want to plead to it because I didn't do it. They're playing games." He launched into a tirade, hurling abuse at Masa's family and accusing lawyers of duping him. He said that he had become public enemy number one. His outburst resulted in staff ending the video link between him and the courtroom. During the hearing, disturbing details of Price's movements on the day that Masa was killed were revealed. From as early as 5:30 a.m, Price had been aimlessly riding public transport around Melbourne. He travelled from his home in Albion to Sunshine Railway Station and back to the city, then continued to Glenferrie and back to Sunshine. His erratic travel continued as he made stops at Footscray, Southern Cross and Parliament stations before eventually arriving in Collingswood, Victoria Street. From there he boarded a bus headed for Doncaster, disembarking at the Park and Ride. Approximately 10 minutes after arriving in Doncaster, Price crossed paths with Masa, who was walking with her headphones on. Without warning, he grabbed her, dragging her into the bushes on the eastern side of the park. He showed her a butcher knife, and as soon as she began to scream, he began stabbing her repeatedly. At one point, he momentarily stopped his attack when he noticed a man walking his dog nearby, but once the man had passed, Price resumed his brutal assault on Masa. As she lay dying, he fled on foot. He stopped to wash his hands in the garden of a nearby home and change his blood-stained t-shirt. The following day, he travelled to Yarraville Station where he disposed of the knife and some clothing in a bin in the toilet. Then on the 27th of August, Price returned to court with a change of heart. He pleaded guilty to the charge of rape, as well as the attempted theft of a BMW. The change in plea came as a surprise even to his own attorneys. The murder of Masa led to a debate about changes in Victoria's legal system. Price had been free to kill her despite his disturbing record of violence and concern that he was a danger to the public. For his previous convictions, the court had upheld his appeal against the sentence for the assaults and had reduced it to time served, which saw Price be released. According to the judge, his mental health had contributed to the crimes, and therefore he was okay to be released. Judge Lisa Hannon had said, "In my view, the material is capable of founding the conclusion that your mental health deficiencies were causally connected to your conduct on this occasion. That is, the offending, and in those circumstances your moral culpability is reduced." She had been told that Price suffered hypoxic brain damage at birth, and that the family had a history of mental illness and physical abuse. If his original sentence stood, which was 3 years, he would never have crossed paths with Masa. The rest of the crimes he had committed, most were violent in nature, but he always received a lenient sentence. As one corrections officer said, "He's very dangerous, but it's too late. Tell that to the girl's family." Furthermore, Price should still have been under supervision at a facility for serious sexual offenders. However, the parole board admitted that they had issued a direction to place him back in the community. So Price had been left to act with impunity when he should have been behind bars, or at the very least, should have been under supervision. After he pleaded guilty to the murder, Attorney General Martin Pakula said that parole and other changes relating to violent criminals would be discussed. He stated, "Clearly what happened to Masa is an absolute tragedy. It shouldn't have happened, and rest assured the government is looking into all of the circumstances. In October, the Serious Sex Offenders and Other Acts Amendment Bill 205 passed in the Legislative Council. Under the new law, sex offenders who serve jail time but are still considered high risk will face more monitoring and could be forced to undergo drug and alcohol testing. Sean Price returned to court on the 14th of December. His defence attorney, Mandy Falk, said that his early years were characterised by abuse. She said he started abusing alcohol as a teenager and then began having auditory hallucinations. She stated, "His early childhood was all but destroyed by physical, sexual and emotional abuse." The defence attorney continued and said that Price suffered from schizophrenia with a range of personality disorders, including psychosis. She said that this reduced his moral culpability for the murder. She revealed that Price once told psychologists that he needed to kill a lot of people to highlight the injustices in the prison system. She stated, "He said by killing he would let people know what no justice will look like, and the beginning of a revolution." After she spoke, Price announced that he was firing her and asked Supreme Court Justice Lex Lastry to ignore everything she had just said in his defence. He said to the courtroom, "I'm guilty of the crime and I wish only to apologise. I don't wish for any leniency to be shown. I don't wish to make excuses for my actions. I witnessed only a small dose of the huge devastation I've caused." However, he further said that the state was responsible for managing him, but said that they failed. He said that in the lead up to the murder he had stopped taking his medication, telling the court, "It hurts. You dribble and you shuffle. It's torture." Prosecutor Michelle Williams touched on his release, telling the judge, "When he was released, he was assessed as medium to high risk of offending. That's precisely what happened." It was the first time that it was revealed that Price was released despite being assessed as medium to high risk. According to a psychologist's report, the most likely scenario was that his mental health would deteriorate and he would stalk and assault women. The day before Masa's murder, he had attended a corrections meeting. The notes stated that he was aggressive and his behaviour was unusual, but nothing was done and Price was allowed to leave. Victim impact statements were then presented, including one from Masa's best friend, Madison Stone. She detailed the impact the murder of her best friend had on her, telling the court that she was taking antidepressants as a way to cope. Price's rape victim also bravely addressed the courtroom. She said that she feared for her life during the attack. In the aftermath, her marriage had suffered, and she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, and she no longer worked. Everybody returned to court the following day for more of the pre-sentencing hearing. Price once more spoke to the courtroom and said that while he deserved to be punished severely, he shouldn't be locked up for life. He acknowledged his own mental health issues, stating, "Something's wrong with me up top." He said that while he had refused his medication in the past, he was now taking it to see if it helped him reform. In February, Sean Price was called back to court, where he admitted to threatening to kill a prison guard over the intercom. The prosecution used this incident to strengthen their case for a life sentence for Masa's murder, arguing that Price posed a continuing threat to society. This admission ensured that the judge would classify him as a serious violent offender, subjecting him to harsher penalties. The following month, when Price was finally sentenced for Masa's murder, Justice Lex Lastry didn't mince his words. Addressing the court, he described the case as a catastrophic example of mismanagement. He expressed disbelief that somebody with such a violent history had been allowed back into the community. He stated, "You should never have been left in a position where you could so easily commit these offences as you roamed around the area of Melbourne, unrestrained and unaccountable." After his damning remarks, the judge sentenced Price to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2054. His scathing conclusion criticised the system that had allowed Price to be released, stating, the executive government has both failed to treat you and failed to protect the community. In the wake of the tragedy, significant reforms were introduced in April of 2016 under what would become known as Masa's Law. The Victorian government allocated $84 million to overhaul how they monitored sex offenders after their release from prison. A new public protection agency was created to track offenders more closely, and early intervention treatments became a priority. Former Supreme Court Judge David Harper led a comprehensive review, proposing critical changes. One key recommendation was to transfer responsibility for detention and supervision orders from the Parole Board to a new unit, the Public Protection Panel. This agency would provide services, monitor offenders, and share information from the moment an offender entered custody. Other reforms included early assessment and treatment of offenders to reduce their risk of reoffending, a new stipulation that supervision orders include prohibitions against violent acts, streamlining of breach proceedings with minor breaches handled in the magistrate's court, and serious breaches prosecuted by the county or Supreme Court. The construction of a 20-bed secure facility to house high-risk offenders. These changes marked a significant shift in Victoria's approach to managing dangerous offenders. The aim was to prevent future tragedies, like the one that claimed Masa's life. Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporter up on Patreon, Sarah. As you all know, Morbidology is a one-woman team, so the support up on Patreon seriously goes such a long way, and I really do appreciate all of your support. If you'd like to support the show in another way, please consider leaving me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you may be listening. I genuinely do appreciate all of the feedback, and it's a super easy way to support an independent show that you like. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.